All rather seat, I know that up here, please feel free to sit down. We're going to start our meeting. Thank you. Land Development Code Amendment Stakeholder Meeting is going to take place Thursday, July 13th, 2023. Stand for the pledge. Good evening, all. My name is Kevin Reedy, County Commissioner, District 1. It's a pleasure to have you all here tonight. Hopefully tonight we'll have an opportunity to have some discussion with various stakeholders that are around the table. Tonight we hope to have clarity, certainty as much as we can do so. And English teachers used to say that obviously uncertainty brings anxiety. And obviously, certainty brings clarity and gives influence. So let's hope we can try to accomplish that tonight. We are going to have 3 meetings, and this is the first of 3. So just a couple of housekeeping situations I want people to understand. First and foremost, I'm a county commissioner, and this ultimately will be an amendment that will come to the county board of county commissioners in September, but ultimately it'll come before myself and for the commissioners as in a zoning matter charter, but we have no interaction whatsoever. Unlike Sanibel, you're allowed to have ex parte conversations. I cannot. So at some point in time, the abundance of caution, when Timbers actually needs to get any conversation, I may need to exit the room. It's not because I don't like anybody in this room. It's because what I want to do is have an opportunity to participate when that opportunity comes up next year, and do it if you can. I think there's a lot of uncertainty along with these amendments. I've talked to many different people, and I think if we can try to just come up with some guiding principles, we can come up with some type of understanding where we have clarity, where we have certainty, where we have some agreement, and where we may not. In private island, I've been here for a long time and recognize that there's only so much capacity you have for portable water, whether it's sewer. And you know, my goal when I was certainly on council for the city of Sanibel and mayor was to see the Sanibel and Captiva come together and be the first conversion from septic to sewer. That's still a goal that I want to make sure that takes place. But with that, I have a lot of restrictions. And you have to recognize that to do that, as long as it happens, we recently just received a letter from Iron Water indicating just how fragile the island is, the capacity we do have. So again, capacity comes to the point where it's limit and can't necessarily over any consistency or whatsoever. Those are still this commission's desire, and I recognize the special place this island is, and I always call this an island. I don't call it an either. There's no place when you go from one to the other where there's a sign that says everything either on my assignment. So let's recognize that we're one island, and what's better for one is better for all. I don't think that anyone on the city council has any difference of opinion, and they know that we're happy to have the mayor here from Sanibel. And in his capacity, obviously, help us as a partner of the county. I got the front county, huge part of that. The Sanibel, the other part of the island, they have their own city charter, and they have the opportunity to have an awful lot. And we need them to be great partners in an opportunity where there'll be some conversion opportunities if we do this right. I recognize that. If we overburden capacity, we may run into issues. So with that in mind, I'm going to obviously do introductions around the table real quickly, and then come on back, and Mr. Rodriguez from county staff will certainly lead us in an overview and code amendments. But let's start over Andy, why don't you kick off on who you are?
Good evening. It's great to see everybody here tonight. Pretty example, but I hope you all today. Very expensive. Good evening, everyone. That's all. The environmental policy.
And you're not.
And well, appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to keep it over to Anthony. What we're going to do is really try to stay to our schedule. This is the first of 3 meetings, so let's understand that you don't need to short cut up down tonight. So let's try to move this along like we can. We're going to the conversation. But Anthony, why don't you lead us into some of the amendments and exactly what the vision. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening again. Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you. My name is Anthony Rodriguez again, and thank you all for being here. As I stated before, I'm the Second Manager with the Department of Development in the county. And prior to kicking off our stakeholder discussion, I wanted to just provide a brief overview of Captiva and South Seas Resort specific amendments to the county's land development code that will be the topic of this evening's discussion. I understand that there's probably varying levels of familiarity with these regulations, but we thought it would be appropriate just to provide a summary for you to orient things and orient this evening's discussion. So by way of background, these amendments were prepared in response to directions from the County Commissioners back in January of 2023. Specifically, the intent was to review and propose amendments to the county's regulations addressing height, setbacks, and other development limitations that are potentially restricting reconstruction of homes and businesses in a manner that reduces potential flooding threats, including LDC provisions applicable to South Seas Resort. In conjunction with the county attorney's office, staff of the Department of Development work together to coordinate those efforts in responsive direction. Just by way of existing regulations, Section 33-1627 of the county's land development code, which is specific to Captiva Islands, provides that building heights in Captiva are limited to the least restrictive of 35 feet above the average grade of a lot in question, 42 feet above mean sea level as measured to the peak of the roof, or 28 feet above the lowest horizontal member at or below the lawful base flood elevation to the mean level of the roof between eave and ridge. The proposed amendments propose to take this language and relocate it to Section 34-2175 of the Land Development Code and revise the regulations to provide for a limitation of 35 feet as measured either from grade or from the lowest, see if I can get this right. The lowest minimum habitable floor elevation for which building permit would be issued if a property is located in a flood-prone area. And that would be measured from the highest point, from that elevation to the highest point of roof surface for a flat roof, to the deck line of a mansard roof, or to the mean height between the eaves and the ridge of a gable, pit, or other pitched height roof. These drawings that are on this slide are on the county website, so some of you may be familiar with them. But these drawings essentially depict mock-ups of what is existing regulation, which is on the top, and also proposed regulations On the left-hand side, I don't know if you can all read those dimensions, but the left-hand side depicts the building height as measured from the lowest point for which a building permit would be issued, midpoint of the roof. And then the dimensions on the right-hand side of each mock-up provide for measurement from grade. With respect to our South Seas Island Resort, South Seas is governed by an administrative interpretation that was adopted by the Department of Community Development as directed by the Board of County Commissioners back in 2002. And what this administrative interpretation does is it establishes a maximum building height of 35 feet above the surrounding grade of the building at its foundation, or 42 feet above mean sea level, whichever is less. The proposed amendments to the Land Development Code will modify the way that building height is measured to provide a consistent method of measurement throughout unincorporated Lee County. And in this instance, we would rely on the underlying zoning district regulations for zoning districts in South Seas, which is 35 feet in height. Again, this is governed by an administrative interpretation. And so the issue here what we have is there's no recognition of a base flood elevation within this administrative interpretation. Height again will be measured from grade to the lowest or to the midpoint of the roof. Sorry, measured from grade or from the minimum lowest point from which building permit could be issued to the midpoint of the roof, depending on the building product. And similar to two slides prior, South Seas, we provided some mock-ups for South Seas Island Resort. The top shows how the height is measured within the administrative interpretation, while the drawings again show measurement of the vertical line of the building from its lowest point from which building permit can be issued to the midpoint of the roof, and also on the right-hand side from the grade to the midpoint. A couple of other proposed amendments. Section 33-1611 removes a reference to the administrative interpretation while retaining exemption from Captiva specific development regulations. That is not to say that administrative interpretation will not remain in effect. It will still be in effect until such time that an application for a rezoning is pursued by the current owner of South Seas Island. In addition, section 33-1614 is proposed to be amended to establish a definition for what South Seas Island Resort is, and a corresponding map is proposed to be incorporated into the Appendix I of the Land Development Code, and that has a graphic depiction of what South Seas Island Resort would be in accordance with this definition. In addition to the changes on the previous slide, section 34-1805 is proposed to be amended to provide that hotel and motel units within South Seas are not subject to density limitation for hotel motel units on Captiva Island. And finally, as referenced in the previous slide, Appendix I would be modified to provide a map that would be cross-referenced to section 33-1614 that establishes the definition and graphic depiction of South Seas Island Resort. And this is a picture of that map. That concludes my presentation. I appreciate your time and your patience, and I'll turn it over back to Commissioner Ruane to facilitate our stakeholder discussion.
Thank you, Anthony. Sorry, I wasn't aware that I wasn't speaking to this at the point. So I'm going to give David Minch an opportunity to talk about obviously the Land Development Code and obviously his role at Captiva on the panel and some of the things that he has actually come and presented. So, David.
Thank you. I want to thank the community for everything they've done over the last couple of weeks. Because with the community, I don't think we'd be here today. So I was going to go through the principles that the Captiva eventually approved. Decided that won't take too long. I'm not going to do that. So what I'm going to try to do is put our heart on the table so that we can have a real discussion about where we are. And that's what you can say is three things happened that caused this incredible community reaction. The first thing is that our Captiva plan and our Captiva Land Development Code was changed on some of the most important features without any consultation with the Captiva Community Panel and Captiva. And I say that to the staff of the county attorney's office. I think it was a mistake. I don't think anybody was served by it. And I hope it doesn't happen again. And I hope we can all learn from that and work together going forward so that it doesn't happen again. That's number one. Number two, this has nothing to do with South Steve's. Now, number two is the proposed amendments increase the building heights outside the gates of South Seas from 2 livable floors to 3 livable floors, habitable floors above base flood elevation. And that change was made, even though no one can see it. And what change does is creates problems for increasing intensity. If you increase intensity of use on caffeine by 50% outside the gate, you go from 4 to 3 floors. It creates problems for our wastewater project because it increases the amount of wastewater potentially if we increase intensity. Creates problems for our fire because we don't have the tools now to fight a fire on the 3rd floor or out there. And it creates, as Commissioner Warren said, they create problems for island water. And so it also changes the character of the village, where we have 50 and 75-foot lots. It's unfair to homeowners who built since 2012 out of code that allows 28 feet above base flood elevation. It's unfair to homeowners who have built and followed the rules for all those years. So our building heights on Captiva, which incorporate base flood elevation, was the result of long deliberations in our community, and we're very proud of them. Adding another floor on top of that does not increase resiliency. And I guess what I would ask the staff now that you understand this, because I don't think there was an understanding that our building heights incorporated base flood elevation when these proposals were made. And I would ask the staff to recommend to the county commissioners or to whomever it is you recommend to remove these amendments as related to Captiva building heights and keep it the way it is in our existing Captiva community plan and our Captiva code. It's worked since 2012. It's worked well. Nobody wants it changed. There's really no reason for it on Captiva. So that's my first request. The third thing that happened is a special exception was made for South Seas from Captiva's density regulation of 3 hotel units per acre and any Captiva building height rules. So there is a proposed exemption from density for hotel units, which were 3 in the plan, and from any building height rules that apply to Captiva. So the truth is, there will be no limit written in the code on the number or size of hotel rooms in any new plan development that South Seas may propose. And building heights in that proposed plan development could reach 70 feet above base flood elevation in some circumstances. I want to make it clear, I'm not saying that South Seas has asked for this, but that they will ask for this. What I am saying is that the code, as the changes are made, will allow them to ask for it. Because the guardrails of 3 hotel units per acre, the guardrails of our existing building heights will be completely removed. So increasing density and building heights for one property owner, as far as we're concerned, is unfair. It's unfair to the other hotels on Captiva. It's unfair to other resorts on Captiva, and it doesn't make sense to us. But more importantly, it sets a precedent for future development. And once you do it here, what's to say you can't do it anywhere else? And it would be wrong for the county to say, okay, you South Seas can have these benefits, but nobody else can have these benefits. It doesn't work. Precedent doesn't work. And then we change the character of South Seas and the island And eventually it would create pressure on the rest of Captiva and even Sanibel to have greater development if we have that precedent set. Now, I just want to make one. Everyone on Captiva and Sanibel wanted Timbers and Southeast to compete. But we want them to play by the same rules as everybody else on Captiva. We support amending the administrative interpretation to comply with current Captiva building heights, base flood elevation. The administrative interpretation is formally strict with historical reasons. The rest of Captiva, which is 28 feet above base flood elevation. For the short, small administrative amendment, we determine the building heights on South Peak to be consistent with the rest of Captiva. There's a provision right in the administrative interpretation, right in the Captiva code that would allow that to happen through administrative. And on this, we fully support South Peak building back what they had while incorporating any new base flood elevation or any other required resiliency rules, whether it be wave attenuation or the buildings are seaward of the CCCA, whatever is required to build back and meet the current regulations Captiva supports. And we believe, sitting here today, it is the intent of the county's building policy. To permit them to. If there's any ambiguity at all, we fully support allowing every non-conforming structure, every structure on South Seas or anywhere else on Captiva to be built back to what they did and to incorporate whatever new base flood elevations or resiliency requirements are necessary. Here's the one. Even two forms of base flood elevation. We have had 8 years of pest control. A lot of people don't they didn't want the building heights to go up, but we convinced the community to do it. You can't unilaterally change that now. But the problem is South Seas doesn't want, as far as I can tell, 2 floors above base flood elevation. South Seas, and I read it in the brief, I heard you say this, South Seas want at least 3 floors. At least South Seas wants 3 floors of the base flood elevation. That's more than the rest of Captiva. And that's where the problem lies. The differences that we have to deal with. And the other thing is South Seas Timbers has been very, very quiet about density. And that's the element in the law. Under the administrative interpretation, Timbers has 247 total units, 140 the old way housing units, 107 homicide hotel units. The rest of the South Seas and the rest of the units, there's 112 units that have administrative interpretation for current development on Captiva and South Seas and future development on South Seas. 912 units. Timbers has 247 of those units. And the question I would pose to Timbers, since they're here and I'm grateful they're here, is are they willing to live with the 247 units that's been allocated to South Seas, or are they going to ask for greater density that takes it above 900 total units they historically living on South Seas? I've read that Timbers doesn't want to replace 107 hotel units at the north end with just 107 units. They want to replace it with closer to 175 units. That's what I read in the magazine quoting Mr. Spencer. So the question I have is that 175 units subtracted from the 247 that they were allocated, or are they looking for an additional, say, 68 units above the 247 that will increase density on South Seas? And then the same question arises when you go to the 140 units. So the question for South Seas and for all of us is to understand what the density is that South Seas is looking for. And if we get an answer to that today, that would be helpful And that would help us and inform us as we go forward. And I think those are the key issues. I don't need to spend more time, I have a lot more I can say. At some point, I just want to make it clear, this will hear that the administrative interpretation is not part of the Captiva code, and that nothing else has anything to do with the Captiva code. That today the administrative interpretation is exempt from the Captiva code and the County Land Development Code. Our view is that is just not true. And when we get to that later, I can show us exactly what that's not true. That administrative interpretation is governed by the county.
Thanks, David. Ken, I'm going to actually put you on the spot. You will.
Anybody here? Yeah. Okay, all right. Commissioner Rand, thank you for hosting this meeting. I appreciate the fact that the community has taken time out to come. As David said, we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for the community, the stakeholders inside South Sea, and here we are. And we're able to sit in a room and have a conversation about what's important to us, what we hold dear and dear to our hearts on standing on Captiva Island. I want to focus a little bit on density, because density through the entire process has sort of been kind of under the bridge a little bit, and I want to bring to the forefront. The past owners of the resort has always lived with the fact that there are 912 density units inside the resort. Okay, 912. And it was the foresight of the Mariner Group, the two gentlemen who started Mariner Group, that made that happen in the early 70s. They're the ones that went to Lee County and changed the density code to reflect the 3 units per acre. They wanted a low density tropical island resort. Okay, so understand where that came from. Later on, it's taken effect on Captiva Island. Now, I've been told over and over again that this whole situation that has come up is because of resiliency. Okay, and certainly that's important to all of us that have been affected by the hurricane who live here. And we all, in some way, some capacity, have been affected by Hurricane Ian. And we are all for resiliency. There's not one of the owners inside Southeast that has come to me and said, you know what, I want things like this. Not one. Everybody understands there is a need for resilient buildings. Okay, so sort of in my crazy common sense mind, I say, let's focus on resiliency. Let's strip out the confusion. Let's take away the density portion of the resiliency plan and leave it alone. Let's leave it as it is. Okay. Now I know that South Seas and Timbers and Greg Spencer, resiliency is important to them. I've been told that. Okay. In fact, I sat through a 1 hour long presentation. They're doing a very nice job of presenting some facts directly to the condo owners associations. They take an hour to explain strictly height. Strictly. Not one time yesterday in the meeting was density discussed. So I'm thinking to myself, if it's not discussed, it's very easy for us just to strip that out, leave it as is, and get down to the fact that we need to talk about resiliency and how we make our buildings stronger and keep our island the way it is. We received a very important letter from the Island Water Association explaining why this needs to happen. Okay, we have heard from CCA of why this needs to happen for our environment. So Let's talk about resiliency. And let's come up with a plan that makes sense. But let's streamline this process and stop being confused about what we're talking about. We're talking about resiliency and density. Increased density has no business being in resiliency. And that's what's important to our ownership group, our stakeholders inside of it. Thank you.
Sarah, can I put you on the spot?
Again, I'm Sarah Spector, and if you couldn't hear me before, I am here with Ashley representing RLR and Royal Shell. And one thing we do want to say is that we've been working with the panel representatives, and Royal Shell and RLR is in favor of the principles as they've been presented. As was discussed at the beginning, the true issue is treating everyone the same from RLR and Royal Shell's perspective, because they're a developer just like South Seas is, so and landholder. So we just ask that everybody be treated the same. And to Mr. Vince's point, I would ask that we look at the build back section specifically, because it could be written more clearly. And because it's always been my understanding that build back means you can build back what you had before, you just have to go higher. But you can't really read that in the code, and I think that's something that we need to discuss, so it's clear from this point forward. But thank you very much for the opportunity to participate.
Thanks, Sarah. So, basically, I think as we continue to go through this process, there's two parts of this, and as I opened up, we have amendments that ultimately will come up with some type of master plan that'll come to us sometime in 24. So, there's two steps, and what I'm hoping to do in the 3 meetings is to try to identify areas where we have some clarity, we can provide some clarity. And obviously some open issues if we continue to have other meetings. But it has impacts when you're on a barrier island, and it has impacts to whether it's your services for fire, your utilities, and obviously island water weed. And we all need to understand what are the necessary ingredients for our infrastructure to be able to handle what we do. And then on top of whether it's additional density, whether you need different utilities, water, sewer, you then will also have a traffic issue, which puts strains on the roads, which obviously will impact the island. And any barrier island only has so much capacity, and this island obviously has really prided itself on the environment and having a taxable value that is, when I first got in office, Sanibel's taxable value was about 25% less than Fort Myers. There was 7,000 people here, and there were 90,000 people in Fort Myers. So when you look at what Sanibel does, is they'd like to do obviously more with less, not more with more. And that's a principle we obviously need to understand. So just wanted to go over those issues, and then obviously turn over to the people from Timbers. I know they have the opportunity at some point in time. If I feel by my representatives that I need to step out, I'll just hand the mic off to somebody. And if Cecil, you're here, you're gonna probably need to be aware of if we both have to step out, because we cannot have, if I didn't make it clear earlier, in our charter, it does not allow us to have an ex parte conversation whatsoever. When I go in on Sanibel, I would disclose the ex parte conversation, but I've certainly been advised that when this eventually comes to a zoning matter, if I have ex parte conversations, that I could potentially not be able to vote on the matter. So as a abundance of caution, if this gets too deep into details, I will exit the room. I'll turn over to you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to talk to you. Commissioner, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to discuss any zoning. We don't have any zoning submission pending before the county, so you can sit right in the back as you're going to get up. Related to the height, I heard several people say, well, you just got to be treated like everyone else. But South Sea currently today is not treated like everyone else when it gets to height. We're measured at base at either the grade or at the 42 feet above sea level. I think the other thing is there's a lot of misnomers out there about what exists today in South Seas. And 55% of the residential structures today are 3 stories or more over parking or other resort facilities. That exists today. And you know, I did want to just step through some of this, but the real issue that we came up with, this happened after the hurricane hit. You know, I have to be honest with you, we didn't, you know, Ken says we were being quiet, you know, but Ken, we were having daily meetings with you and the other board presidents after the hurricane hit, trying to get materials to the island, trying to get everything back. We spent literally the whole rest of 22 just trying to get cleaned up. We hauled up 110 million debris for everybody, not just ours, everything. We didn't tell you to call anybody, we handled it. So, you know, there was no kabuki theater going on here. We were focused on trying to just, you know, we got punched in the nose, we're trying to recover. Around the end of December, January timeframe, we started looking at getting our hotel back online. We didn't have any intentions of tearing the hotel down. We talked for a second when we first bought it, and then we just ran the numbers and said, hey, Blackstone only repaired a handful of the rooms. So you had 2 different products. We said, let's at least bring everything up. It didn't have hurricane rated windows. It didn't have a lot of things in it. So we wanted to get a consistent resort experience. We started working with the county, and the county said, hey, by the way, when we went to go pull a demo permit, you're now in a flood zone. And we're like, well, when are we in a coastal A flood zone? And it happened after the storm hit. So we were pretty shocked and surprised. And when we started looking into that, that's when we started realizing and looking at the build back code of what was allowed. We had to meet the test for 50%. I know a lot of people have said, hey, I've driven by those buildings, they don't look that bad. We got literally tens and tens of thousands of gallons of water. There's mold throughout, it's totally shot. So we have to tear the buildings down. I'd rather not fiscally, you know, we took about a $400 million hit, but that's the reality. So this is when this first started, and I know more about LIM law lines, which is lines of moderate wave action, CCLs, things than I frankly wanted to know about, but we had to deal with it. So I'm not going to bore everybody and go through this. I know some people have said that they've seen this already. We really did this as a tool for our owners just to try to figure out how to navigate this, and I'm happy to post this to our website. So I see people trying to take pictures, but we can post it to our website. But we were just really trying to help the layperson figure out how to step through this. Next page, please. And again, all we did is we followed the actual language in the code. We didn't make this stuff. We just started looking at the code and what does it say. And you know, one of the big principles that you did, we went out to the D County website. And there's a website dedicated to this. Talks about what happens in a significant flood hazard area. That's what SFHA is. Next page. Then we went to the 2002 ADD. And again, we're writing this for our owners to be able to try to follow this because it's confusing subject, 1,000%. Our ADD, you know, clearly you see what it is for new occupants. It points us to the Lee County build back provision. Next page. This is the Lee County build back provision. And some of the issues that we run into is people stop reading when they get to what they like. But the reality is you got to read the entire code. And I believe Ms. Spector mentioned it before. It is confusing. It's not clear. Because in one section, fast forward a couple pages, you know, one more, you know, sorry, one more. It basically steers you to, it says that, I'm sorry, go back. Sorry, folks. Sorry, when you're not driving, go back one more. So right there, so and I see the confusion on B. It says, hey, you know, for multifamily commercial structures, right? It says that you get the dimensions, setback, lot coverage, height, handicap access, covering. It mentions all that, right? But then you jump down to the next section, it talks about modifications, right? And it says, you know, or that will allow. So this is the emergency review board. To my knowledge, has not been informed about it. But it basically says that you have to essentially look at the special height limitation. And the special height limitation, if you go forward, go forward one more. And 34-2175 for the entire island of Captiva says that in the build back provision, you have 35 feet over grade, 42 feet over high tide. That's written language. It's not us interpreting it. That's what it says. Now, I know that the county has said, well, it could be a situation where possibly we don't hold you to that. That's not what the code says. And when you have lenders and when you have financial partners and you have insurers and you go to build something back, they're looking at that. What is the code say? They check this stuff for compliance. So we started asking the question of the county, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with this in certain areas where we might have an 18.5-foot base flood elevation? Because what the county does not have any power to do is to weigh what the base flood elevation is. That's a federal guideline. The county can, I'll let the county speak for themselves, but to my knowledge, the county can't wave a wand and say, no, you can build below flood. That is not allowed. And by the way, in certain zones, when you get forward of the limb wall line or the coastal control line, you actually have to go to the state DEP to get approval for what you're building back. Next page. To demystify the units, that 55% of the units are 3 stories of parking or reusable space. Next slide. These are live buildings today, and it shows exactly what they are. And we can get into a whole debate of 3 units per acre or 2. None of these comply with that either. Next slide. So again, today, there's 47 buildings at 47 feet over mean high tide today. And they don't conform with either the ADD or the build back height language. Next slide. Next one. Again, 47.8 feet. Next slide. Next one. 42 feet. So this one actually complies, but again, there's a difference between outside the gates and inside the gates. Inside the gates, there's no whichever's least restrictive. Inside, it says whatever more restrictive. So it's either 35 feet over grade or 42 feet over high tide, whatever's more restrictive. Next slide. Next one, please. Beach villas, this one's 47.6. Both beach villas and bayside villas are actually 4 stories. So they're 3 stories with a loft. So they're actually 4 habitable. Next slide. Fast forward, please. Next one. So the limb wall line, I think this surprised us. We weren't aware of the change, and shame on us, maybe we should. It was decided in spring of 2022 that these lines were going to change, and it went into effect, I believe it was November 15th or 17th. I think I misstated before. Next slide. November 17th. So 50 days after the storm hit, this action went into effect. And so I can show you what the lines mean. Next slide. We just put some language in there because it's very confusing of what's zone B, what's a coastal zone A. So again, this is being shared with our owners so they can try to track this down. This is from RDB's website. Next slide. Next one. So what's the impact of cell sites? You see the purple. That's what's in this coastal zone A. Before the storm, that didn't exist, right? You can see our entire North Pole, all of our 1,800 building of our hotel, most of the 1,700 building of the hotel, even part of Harborside. Luckily, it's removable, so we take it off to get it out of the line. But all that is within now this lemon line. So it changes when you're in a lemon line or you're forward of the CCL line. It's not, I know Mr. Mentz mentioned base flood elevation. Base flood elevation is not what you can build at. It provides a reference of what you have to do to meet flood insurability. But depending upon where you're building, the measurement changes. In the case of a limb wall line, it goes from the floor that you stand on to the lowest horizontal structure. So that's another 2.5 feet that you're losing. On top of that, Lee County is governed by Florida Building Code. Florida Building Code has different calculations for that as well, depending upon if you're forward of the CCL line or behind it. So that's the issue. Like even when you get to BFE, that's not the end of the equation. You can still lose presumably 2.5 to 3 feet, even when you get past that. Fast forward, please. Again, we show, Bayside Villas got super lucky, right? And I understand why some people could say, well, it doesn't need to change. There's nothing impacting on me. If you live in the middle of the island, that's probably true. But if you live along the bay, or if you live on the beach, these lines have changed. They've changed since 1984, 10 times. The FEMA flood measurement has changed 10 times. And if we think it's not going to change when it was decided in spring of 2022, it's not going to change after the storm, after all the data points, I think people are kidding themselves. Next page. Keep going forward. We're trying to educate folks what the CCL line is. Next page. This just shows where the line is. The blue line is the CCL line, and it really shows anything forward of that CCL line between the calculation of it's a significant flood zone and with the wave action in the building codes, you can be as high as 18.5 feet. And this just shows you it's not just us, it's a lot of the island of cells that's impacted us. Next slide. This shows all the way the Hillgrove Vacations has multiple buildings that are impacted by this. A lot of single family homes are impacted by this. Next slide. All down the beach, all the single family homes, beach homes are impacted by this. Next slide. And then finally, you get to the end of the property plans. So there's an impact from these changes. I defy anybody to say there's no impact, and I appreciate Mr. Vince acknowledgement there's an impact, because when we first started on this, it was like, well, South Seas island resilience, and not saying he quoted that, but that was what was out there. There's nothing to see here. There's no problem. There's clearly a problem. Next slide. Keep going forward, please. Again, we wanted to show this isn't us. This is off of Florida DEP's website. What the calculation is for the monument next to one of these buildings. So again, we're not making this up. This is we're pulling all these links. That's why we put all the links to the county site, state site, so people can determine it themselves. Next slide. Again, we just showed in the interpretation that exists today what is lost. Again, maybe the county can waive it. Maybe that's okay for certain lenders, but I'm telling you what the code says, you would lose the yellow hash part of the building. Next slide. Bayside villas, that's the impact there. Those are the two least impacted of everything. Next slide. If you get out to Land's End is all the way out, all the way seaward of the blue line. It's a significant impact. The blue line is where your permitted habitable floor is. And the red line is what the height's calculated today. So again, there's going to be an impact. Next slide. And that finally shows beach villas. Again, they have a loft. They're beachfront. Now, one of the full disclosure parts of beach villas are behind the line, some are in front of it. So that's not representative of everybody at beach villas, but some. Fast forward. On the resiliency, I've heard references that high behind resiliency, this is really about resiliency. The irony is we actually funded the resiliency plan for the entire island of Cattiva. It was done 12 days before the storm hit. It actually predicted almost with 100% accuracy what was going to happen from a flood perspective, particularly down at Blind Pass. And why did we do that? When we were doing our due diligence, we came up here and we saw there's a tropical storm watch fire, and we saw some of the flooding along the Andy Rossi. We were concerned about that. We saw some of the water penetrating the Redfish Pass from Land's End. There were lakes out there before, but some of the lakes were only 18 inches deep. They really weren't functional. So, I started talking to some consultants to try to figure out what do we need to do internally to deal with stormwater. And then they basically said, well, you can't get any grants, but the island hasn't done their vulnerabilities. So we funded that. And now everybody, CEPD, SCCA, other people are eligible for state resiliency grants because the vulnerability assessment's been done by island. So, I take exception to the fact that we haven't done it. That was done before the storm. It was done, even our golf course that we're building right now, we're building that back resilient. We're adding, additional drainage where we can handle 5 inches an hour for sustainably 4 hours to try to handle some of the flooding that was happening at the north end of the property. And we paid for that out of our own dollars. There's no grants, there's nothing we can get for it. But as we're building golf course back, we wanted to try to fix some of the stormwater issues that existed out there. Next slide. So, everybody says, oh, you don't need height to be resilient. I disagree 100%. If you look at some of the associations out there, 40% of their damage came from mold. And because they didn't have HVAC systems, they didn't have power. They didn't get wind damage when this didn't blow in. They didn't get water. There was a lot of roof where water drained out. But there's units out there that were impacted by mold. And I just think that there's gotta be a smarter way. We developed out in Hawaii, Hurricane Nikki, Category 5 hit the island and destroyed 70% of the structures on the island. And this is what Hawaii County requires, is for you to put your mechanical systems, try to put some renewable energy, 65% of the island's renewable, try to put that in the parapet so you get it out of the window. Because, you know, we had, I'll let the association speak for themselves, but there's quite a bit of impact damage from either trees falling or the surge or the compressors for the HVAC systems were taken out. Next slide. Next one. So why do you need a little extra height? We lost 140 vehicles. We had them parked at the highest point on the property. And I know some people say, well, too bad for you, you should have gotten them off the island. But we were trying to evacuate folks. I've heard the whole point about evacuation. We had zero people on our property during the storm. We evacuated everybody off. And, you know, we got everybody off, but in doing so, we don't have time to caravan 140 vehicles. So we did have this impacted. If you look across the island, those Santa Barbara, Captiva, how many trailers full of cars did you see get hauled off because people couldn't get their vehicles out there? So why wouldn't we try to get things, you can't handle 16 feet over grade, but why can't you get things a couple feet higher than what a possible storm surge would be, or even just a possible flooding rain would be? So, you know, we would love to have the opportunity to add a couple of feet in there. It doesn't change the language that the county has, the minimal permittable and palatable floor. It doesn't, you don't get extra height, you just eat into whatever you have, 35 feet, 45 feet, if you want to raise the vehicles up out of the lot. Next slide. Next slide, please. Keep going. So again, I know the county had their illustration. This is I think another illustration that just shows what happens when you have static height and what happens when the flood up the DFE design flood elevation. We're using that term because that actually incorporates building code, etc. You know what happens when that changes, and we show the frequency of how frequencies change. And then you've already seen the next slide. It just shows what happens when it goes up. Obviously, if it's extreme, you don't have screening and things like that. You type parking up underneath the building. You could have a couple of feet where you could get vehicles out of the flood. But that's what we're here to talk about. We're here to support the county. Again, this wasn't, we weren't sitting there rolling our hands after the storm saying, well, how can we take advantage of it? It's the contrary. We were trying to clean up the resort. We really started on this rabbit hole when we started looking at what can we build back on the hotel. Frankly, before this, we were focused primarily on getting the amenities and getting those things up. And we have a lot of amenities planned. But to be honest with you, I know everybody keeps saying, well, what is your plan? I don't know what my plan is because I don't know what I got mentioned. Because I can tell you, if you don't have any of allowances, if you're 35 feet over grade, and guess what? You're not building seaward of the coastal control line. You're building behind it. I think frankly that will do more to change the fabric of the community. The other item that you have is when you have a restricted height, you start getting flat roofs, right? Because people are like, okay, well, I don't want to violate it. And you put mechanicals up there, it's exposed. Our conference center is uninsurable. You know, most mechanical systems got blown off of it because it doesn't have any wind load protection. And, you know, at the end of the day, we have to be able to build back stuff that is insurable, that is market, that is what responsible for the finance, right? And that's the challenge. As it relates to the hotel, my specific reference to that energy was like, there's no such thing as 107 key hotel. I mean, there was one out there, but you can Google in the last 20 years, how many 107 new, 107 key new hotels open, and they don't exist because it's just not an accurate number. So what we're trying to say is that you have to be able to build what's marketable. And, you know, I think the other thing that I'll make a commitment to, because I'm not here to talk about zoning, because the reality is we haven't asked for anything yet. We asked questions of the county. The county, I believe, I'll let them speak for themselves, they have some conflicts, ambiguity in the code. We are treated differently, and it's not just us, it's all about we are treated differently than the rest of Captiva Island. And I think that there's changes that need to be made. I will tell you that before we submit anything to the county, we will have a public meeting with all the owners of South Beach, and we will get cards up on the table what we're going to ask for. But I'm not prepared to do that right now, because we haven't done any planning and analysis beyond just trying to figure out what the lines mean, what can we build. The other thing I'll just say is that, you know, we're committed to building responsibly and trying to build the right things. I encourage anybody to go out and look at our website and find something that you're like, oh, that's out of place, you know, of course, naturally. And Vale, you know, you have higher stories and you're in the valley, but you know, that's I think a 5-story building. And you know, you have most of our product is really 3 stories, 2 to 3 stories, right? And we've developed on bigger houses, developed on Key Island, South Carolina, you know, and you know, that was a successful development and you know, we did it in a responsible way. So I just would you know, say that when it comes time to have a substantive conversation on planning, when we've done the analysis, traffic, water, sewer, economic impact, which hasn't been discussed, all those things, we'll lay it out. We'll get cards up on the table before it goes to the county. I committed that to Commissioner Lang and other commissioners, and we'll have that with the owners and Celsius. And but we need to get some type of direction on height before we can do that. The last thing I'll leave you with is, you know, the earliest we could possibly get a hotel back online, we believe, is sometime in 2026. And so I hear, oh, just push this off a little bit more. You know, we believe, and we've been told by the county that the ADD is not something that can be changed. We have to go through a PD to convert it. Right? Frankly, we would like to have clarity. The land development code provides clarity of what you can do. The problem is we have a bunch of things that are outside of the land development code in this ADD. And I think at some point in time, it should be converted just so you understand what the rules are. So that's what we wanted to at least discuss. And I appreciate everybody for listening. And I'm not naive enough to think that everybody's believe or agree or support or whatever that I say, but I did want to try to just step through what we believe the impact is, not just ourselves, but everybody within the gates of Celsius, and what we need clarity on so we can figure out what our next steps are to build that. And as it is right now, we haven't torn the hotel down. We are trying to go through the permitting process right now. There's other things that we're frankly more focused on right now, pools, golf courses. We built a $3 million revetment at Redfish Pass that we hardened. It wasn't hardened before, but we did it, anyway, just to try to not have this happen again in another storm. And I think that's the thing that hopefully at some point in time, I know we could band-aid it, but why have the catastrophic damage that we have after every storm? And I think that's part of the challenge that we have to try to address, is that it's just, it gets to an insurance point. You know, we can only get $50 million in insurance for the entire property. That includes business interruption, that includes casualty. That's what our total insurance was, because basically Blackstone had hit the 2 other events and they didn't make any changes to the structure. And that's a problem. So I appreciate y'all's time. Thank you for being respectful when we get through it. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Obviously, there's questions, and obviously what we're trying to do tonight is to try to provide whatever clarity we can. I've listened to a few people that are attorneys indicate that our ADD is certainly ambiguous, to say the least, and there's complex throughout. So I don't think anyone is against resiliency. I don't think anyone's trying to avoid height. There's just, obviously, as you talked about before, Greg, you have capacity issues, and you're gonna have capacity issues that are gonna correlate back to fire, and correlate back to utilities, they're gonna sewer, water. I mean, again, everyone's gonna have to plan no different than you from our island water to try to do what's necessary. So I think resiliency is one aspect and density is another. And there's separate.
Can I just say something about Greg's presentation? I think it was really helpful, but it is a red herring, because what he is showing are the issues related to build back. And I think that it's very good for the county to see it, because there are issues of the CCCL, structures, seaward of the CCCL. There's issues of wave attenuation, there's issues of base flood elevation, And no one here doesn't support building back to incorporate all the resiliency measures that every jurisdiction requires. And our understanding of the Lee County build back provisions, which are very comprehensive and well thought out, may be needing a little bit of updating since we had a couple of hurricanes since then, and that's reasonable. And all these drawings you saw about what's necessary to make sure you can build back what you have should be incorporated in the build back provisions, and that's important. But that is very different than eliminating the density limitations of 3 hotel units per acre on South Seas, because it has nothing to do with build back, it has nothing to do with resiliency. And that's what caused this uproar from the community, is because what the amendments do is eliminate the density limitations for South Seas, different than anybody else on Captiva. And it also eliminates the height restrictions, not for build back, but for new building that has nothing to do with hurricanes. And they want heights that's different than anybody else building on Captiva that has nothing to do with hurricanes. And that's the problem. We support everything the county can do to make the build back provisions clear and resilient and allow people to get exactly what they have and still be able to meet the new requirements for resilience. But we're not in favor of creating a blank check on density for hotel units on South Seas or anywhere else on Captiva. And we're not in favor of having 70 buildings above base flood elevation for new construction that has nothing to do with build back. And that's what the amendments do, and that's the problem.
So. Okay. Honestly, we're having a meeting and we can't have, I appreciate what you're doing, but we're trying to have a productive conversation. Try to stop this. This isn't the way we're supposed to have a conversation. I appreciate everyone's emotion here, but let's just try to stay focused on what we're having a conversation about. One is resiliency and height, two is density, and they're two separate issues. You know, the person that actually put this amendment together, worked with the county, was really someone that's headed up the task force for resiliency and building back resiliency. I want to see everything we can do for resiliency. And I also want to make sure we look into the future, not looking at something because some realize that this storm's going to have some issues. So I don't think there's anyone in this room that's going to question resiliency when you're trying to have protection. And that's something that I think there's a lot of ambiguity inside the amendment. So you're now asking 5 commissioners to pass something that contradicts each other. And I have a couple of attorneys just on this panel that would say there's contradictions in the actual amendments themselves. So when I have people that specialize in land development code, and that's what Sarah's firm does, and they're obviously concerned as a commissioner, I'm listening as a zoning commissioner and have this firm constantly before me. I believe they're the experts. I have to at least listen to their concerns and make sure we address those. So there's resiliency, there's height, and then there's density. They're two separate issues. And I don't believe we're going to get the density tonight. And that's not really my objective. We have 3 meetings. But there needs to be clarity in amendments. And I think there's enough ambiguity that right now as a commissioner, when I don't like something, it's no. It's that simple. And that's basically, I've had my own anxiety because I've listened to several attorneys say their interpretation, which like anything else, you have 2 attorneys, you might have 2 different results, but we can't have that amount of ambiguity in any ordinance at all. I mean, we just can't.
So as I spoke earlier about density, there is no ambiguity on density. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. So there is on this height and build back. There's not on density. So I just want to make sure that is said.
It's 2 separate issues. I mean, certainly we have height and we have density. I mean, there's 2 separate issues. And everybody's going to have an issue with insurance. We're all getting renewals. We'll certainly go through that travesty. So you want to make your property as insurable as possible. and you want to show your insurance company you've done everything to mitigate their risk. I understand that point, you know, and certainly want to make sure we continue down the path, but you know, it's just a conversation that we need to have, and I don't know that I've heard anything about density tonight that's going to give us any clarity. But, you know, I'd like to try to get to a point of height where we have an understanding where we need to be, because again, there's an interpretation that one could get to that we require 75 feet. And that just seems to be too high. Again, I was just at a hearing last 2 weeks ago where height was limited in a rural area. I can't imagine the same height or greater height in a coastal area. So, I mean,
Commissioner Roy, if I could just add my thoughts to this. First of all, some folks have asked, why is the CCA involved in it? So they just want to give folks a little bit of background. CCA has been in existence on Captiva since 1936. We have a standing land use committee and we have a standing land use policy. And part of that policy says that we would preserve the Captiva's environment and maintain the strict limits on density and heights as currently stated in the Lee County plan, and oppose any exceptions. So that gives the basis for CCA being involved here. We've been involved for decades in old lawsuits and disagreements going back on South Seas and areas outside South Seas. But to your point, Commissioner, where do we want to get to? The Captiva Community Panel in the last week or so has put together, as David mentioned earlier, a series of principles that they felt that the community could work around in order to get to where we need to get to here. And we at the CCA, our Board of Governors, reviewed them and wholeheartedly unanimously endorsed them. And I'm not going to read them verbatim, but just to give you the highlights of it so people understand where we as the stakeholders here are coming from. It says that we oppose any increase in the 3 units per gross acre. Propose special exemptions, support the elimination of any ambiguity in the county's build back policy, and that we request that the county correct the outdated height limitations in section 34 of the land development code, and make sure that you include what is stated in chapter 33 on base flood elevations. That, of course, in an area where you have additions to the base flood elevations, as Mr. Spencer mentioned, that would add to that and increase that amount as well. And we support efforts in order to make sure that Captiva is more resilient and that resiliency be built into all of this that we're discussing here tonight. And I think if we focus on those principles, we can begin to develop language that gets us there. And I think that's what the commissioner is talking about. How do we get there and what is it that we include? So we at the CCA are look forward to working with whomever we need to sit down with to make sure that that is what is accomplished here. We do not favor one landowner, of course, having exceptions that other landowners don't have. We believe it should be the same for everyone, whether you're inside the gates or outside the gates. And the ADD should be modified in order to make sure that everyone is treated the same way.
Thank you, Commissioner, for coming out here tonight. I think it's a great leadership step for you to have taken this and get this conversation out in the open. I think one of the things that ignited this public response was the fact that we didn't have clear, transparent communications up to this point. And I think that's exactly what ignited this fire that's burning and tearing our communities apart. I think when we talk about resiliency, I don't think there's anyone in this room, I don't think there's anyone from the island of Hannibal or the beaches of Fort Myers that would disagree that we all need to be taking steps towards being more resilient. We talk about it on Hannibal endlessly. we're taking steps to do exactly that. We look to our island of Captiva as our sister island the same way. I think the other thing that's really important is the community of Sample has been here before. Not quite 50 years ago, when there were some changes that were proposed for a rapid development and intense development on the island of Sample. The community at that time rose up and said, wait, stop, this is not what we want. This is not what we want for our community. Commissioner, in your opening remarks, you mentioned several of those things, and you stood as a champion for those very ideals. Since I think, what was it, a week or two after you got here? 2 weeks. I showed up, I think it's about 3 weeks, but I applaud the efforts that you took in, and I applaud the efforts you're taking today. And I think there is plenty of opportunity for conversation about resiliency. But when you shift gears and you move from resiliency and you move into density, Commissioner, I would agree with you. Those are two different topics, two totally different subjects that we need to take a look at, but not in congruence with each other. The building height, I think there's some conversation there, because if you're going to be resilient, you're going to build back, you're going to have to look at your building heights. I'm not saying what you have to do there. I wouldn't do that. But I will say that the city of Sanibel held a special meeting with regard to these LDC changes once we learned of these. And we invited everyone in the community. We invited the County of Lee to join us that night. We invited all of our Captivians to be there, including Greg and his team from Timbers, to be there and talk about what these LDC changes really mean and what it could potentially do to our community. And I've heard this several times tonight from different speakers that, and there was a time on Sanibel when we didn't concern ourselves with what happened outside of the city limits. Kevin, you and I both know that that was a mistake. And I'm not going to be here as one of 5 leaders of the city of Sanibel to make that same mistake again. What goes on around us absolutely impacts us on Sanibel. So at that meeting, I'm going to go on the record and tell everyone at that meeting, there was a crystal clear position from everyone at that meeting. And as far as I know, everyone that attended that meeting via Zoom or whatever electronic means were available to them, that the LDC changes that are being proposed as is are an absolute no-go with the city of Sanibel. That is absolutely cannot go forward. I think the Board of County Commissioners, respectfully, I request that you vote no on that topic. And then let's get back and take a look at that and find out where yes is, at what point is yes there. And there's been a lot of discussion tonight on what's needed. There's been a lot of discussion tonight on what's appropriate, what's there in the past, and what's worked well for us. And I think there's an opportunity to do exactly that. We all need to be thinking more resilient. We live on barrier islands. We need to think about that, and we need to think about resiliency first. But resiliency does not include increased density. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. So I really want to keep the two separate if we can, and height, I think we need to do as good of a job as we can to identify what height is needed. And I don't think anyone's here going to have a conversation that doesn't want to protect ourselves, to ensure ourselves, and height's a whole different conversation. And I think that clarity that staff can certainly bring, talk with Mark, and hopefully we can tighten that up. I think they're two separate elements, and I'd like to see everything we can possibly do. As someone that's received the 20 pages of amendments and the changes, there's paragraphs, as Sarah indicated, that contradict each other. So we commissioner when I have contradictory language, I'm just going to vote no. It's that simple. Unless you provide clarity, I can't have certainty. And with uncertainty, gives me anxiety, gives my community anxiety. We received over 5,000 emails on this topic alone. So again, I think none of us wanted to do it this way. I met with Mr. Spencer, and he certainly indicated he wanted to get in front of this, and unfortunately, this got in front of us. So we are where we are, and I'd like to try to move and separate the two items between height and density. And if anything we can do to bring clarity by the third meeting to identify height and work with staff, I'd like to try to achieve that.
Commissioner, I think this is maybe easier than it seems. I think that we all can agree to the principle and can ask staff to carefully look at this. To recognize that building heights are going to be different in different parts of the county. They're going to be different based on what your base flood elevation, where you are in the CCCL, where you are in terms of wave attenuation, in wind, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we want the heights to be, whenever they are, above that resiliency. So on Captiva, whatever you need for resiliency, and if Greg, you're right, it's 18.6 feet, then I would say you take your 18.6 feet, and under the Captiva code, you can do 2 full floors above 18.6 feet, and you'd be consistent with the Captiva code. And we would work with you. We would work closely with you to make sure your AED, your administrative interpretation, is amended to incorporate the new building heights on Captiva. And if your base flood elevation or your resiliency is 100 feet, not 18 feet, but it turns out to be 100 feet, we would support you at 28 feet above the 100 feet, so you still have 2 full livable floors. So in answer to your question of height, we figure out what the resiliency measures are in the different parts of the county. And then we start at that point and we go from there. And that seems to be pretty easy. All we're saying is that heights for new buildings, which have nothing to do with resiliency and nothing to do with build back, don't belong in this particular omnibus piece of an ordinance. And density, I agree with you, is a completely different issue and doesn't belong in an ordinance about resilience. And if we can eliminate those things and then work on height and resiliency, I think we can all agree. I really do.
I mean, the other thing I think Craig said, which I agree with, is that we have to be prepared that after Ian, that FEMA is going to come in and potentially change our maps and potentially give us more height that's required. And I don't want to see anyone have a development where all of a sudden they move to goalposts and we now have to go 5 feet more. So we have to have provisions that also codify when changes come in as a result of Ian and whatever that comes out, it was 2 or 3 years from now. We need to make sure that obviously the businesses, the people that are making the investments have that opportunity to incorporate those and not be penalized as a result. So I think if we can work towards height, I think that's one objective. And I honestly don't want to try to achieve density tonight, because we're not there. And we're already an hour and 20 somewhat minutes. So if we could just have an understanding amongst the stakeholders, if we could separate the two, height being one and density being another, and we're not going to address density tonight. It's not, we don't have a plan. And if there's something, we'll forego into the next meeting, with the meeting that we come to in September. But I think we can certainly get to a height point of view. We need to do some tightening of that, because I don't think anyone in this room doesn't want to have a product that's not insurable. I don't think that anyone in this room doesn't want to give the greatest protection when it comes to height and resiliency. So we can all agree as stakeholders that we all agree in the principle of height and resiliency. We want to have the greatest protection possible.
I think again, this is getting a little twisted. The real issue is where do you start measuring whatever the height is? I don't understand why we keep trying to box into the 28 or whatever. I just showed you that there's 47, 48 feet tall buildings. The issue is the code doesn't calculate, it's where do you start measuring whatever the height is. Whether it's 28 feet, and by the way, I've never asked for 75 feet. I said publicly that we would like 45 feet and 3 habitable floors, but if it's not 45 feet. You know, it's up to the county, 3 habitable floors and 55% of the units out there today. You know, so I don't understand the non-conformance, that's what exists today. But I think the real issue is getting lost is where do you start measuring from? And there's inconsistencies throughout the county. And I think I agree with you, Commissioner. I don't think you need to say, well, for the next 3 years, you just need to say whatever the lowest minimum permittable habitable floor is, it calculates. If the Florida Building Code says, well, you need an extra 2 feet of freeboard, it's the lowest permittable, and you can't game it. Because the bottom line is that is where you start measuring from. Now, whether you want to have vehicles up 2 or 3 feet below that, and you want to eat into some of that height, you can, but you don't get extra height because it's measured at the lowest permittable habitable floor. And I think that's the biggest thing that's being lost. If that really needs to be, and that's what I believe the county staff is trying to do. I'd love to hear from the county staff. That's what the county staff is trying to do, is actually say, where do we start measuring whatever it is in whatever part of the county? And I think that's the point that might be getting lost here. Anthony.
Sure, so if I could, those amendments that are before us this evening, one of the main goals is to establish exactly that. Where do we start to measurement of building height? And it's tied to your lowest habitable floor for which a building permit can be issued. So if you're not in a flood prone area, that starts 12 inches above grade, which is already a current code provision we have on the books. If you are seaward of the CCCL and your elevation is set at DEP by DEP to 19 feet, we would start the measurement from there. So that I think we are all in agreement on, and that particular where you start is accounted for, and I think we, based on what I'm hearing, I think we all agree that that's appropriate. It's the question really is where you finish.
And you know, in anything I've said tonight, I haven't talked about 42, 45, or 48. I've never boxed in, because what I want to try to do is establish that height is something we need to achieve to make sure we're insurable and we're resilient. So I haven't put a limitation, and I'm not saying the sky, you know, obviously, but we have to have an understanding, and I think Anthony just summarized what I think we all agree upon. And let's see what we can do to tighten that language up. So there's not any ambiguity, because I've had attorneys to my right indicate there's ambiguity, and they're before me, you know, a couple times a month in zoning matters. So I have to digress to their expertise.
I'd love to hear what ambiguity is, because there's other planning attorneys here. So I'd love, like, if there's a specific ambiguity, lowest minimum permittable habitable floor, I'd like to understand what ambiguity is. Again, you know, under the, not trying to gotcha, sorry, but I'd like to understand what that is. So we can at least agree that, okay, there's not an ambiguity of lowest minimum permittable habitable floor.
I think for our next meeting, that's probably to be achieved. I don't know if in 20 minutes, we're gonna be able to pen that, and I've never been a big believer on the fly. So let's go back and do that. I mean, I think we can all agree upon that, and Anthony did a good job of summarizing it. So I think we can have that as a revision, restart the conversation, because nobody doesn't want to see an insurable or a non-insurable issue. No one wants to see anyone vulnerable to resiliency. We can separate the two. It's going to be a different conversation than density. And my concern in general is when you start getting into those conversations, you have the chief of fire, obviously you have Pine on that, you have utilities, you have land and water, you have certainly infrastructure issues that are going to be affected, and we're all going to have to make adjustment to that. But at the moment, I think everybody in this roundtable can indicate that we want to have something that's insurable, something that obviously is resilient, and something that gives a fair representation and fair measure.
I'll just have a comment. It would be great if you could come up with this language sooner rather than later and have everybody come up with a draft of what you're proposing. Then the other things to look at and make sure that it's something that is reasonable to do. And then that would be off the table, hopefully by you have a September meeting, that's already been taken care of, hopefully within the administration. end things, and with that opportunity, so people can go forward and get building permits and understand what they can build and can't. Do you think that's reasonable to do within like a month? Or what would you say?
I'd like to challenge staff to see if we could have this amendment and or revision by the next meeting, we have a set vote.
In the staff talk about what you have to do, because we have to go back to the start. You have to go to ISO, you have to go back through the LPA, you have to go back to the beginning of this. I'd love to hear staff. I don't believe you can just change the amendment. It's already gone through, albeit it's already been reviewed.
I think that the commissioners, when they consider these amendments, and I don't want to put Commissioner Wayne on the spot, but I think that when they consider these amendments, they have the ability to make amendments based upon a staff recommendation or a particular change, based upon feedback from the series of meetings.
Thanks. Okay. I just wanted to.
I mean, you know, just to clarify, because I think you're bringing an interesting point. All the subcommittees are advisory boards to us. We are the policy makers. And honestly, when I have 5,000 emails, there's a lack of certainty and there's a lack of clarity that we owe to our residents here. So that's what I'm hoping to achieve. And again, we could have a goal that may be far reaching, say, let's have it for the August meeting. But we certainly need to have it clarified by the third meeting, the latest, and I'd like to see us get it for the second meeting. So we at least can come up with an understanding on height, resiliency, and where we measure from and where we go to. I think that's achievable.
Yeah, I have a question for Anthony. It seems to me that the discussion that we've been having really talks about amending and clarifying the section 13 and district zone, which is the building policy of the county. And that's where there's a lot of ambiguity in terms of height. Because in that build out policy, it says you can build back the same intensity, same square footage, and in one place it says height, and in another place it doesn't mention height. So I think it's in that section, which is 13 and a half, which is a very well done section, but it's got to be clarified. But that's the build back policy, and I think that's Commissioner Loon, which you're asking staff to look at. But I just want everybody to understand that there's nothing in the proposed amendments that have to do with that section. That section is something the Captiva Community Panel has been saying and endorsed to clarify, make sure you can build back exactly what you had, incorporating all the things that Craig Spencer spoke about in terms of resilience. And so I would ask the staff to take a look at that provision, Anthony, not the other provisions.
So there is actually a substantially similar, if not identical provision in chapter 34 of land development codes. Section 34, 32, 41, B2D. I see it when I close my eyes. And it basically says, and I think this probably clarifies the point, that you can build back a non-conforming building to its documented height, density, and intensity, provided that you comply with current building code regulations.
And that actually exists in our Captiva code too, in that section. And that's why I think there's a lot of confusion here. Because people are getting scared that they can't build back. But the policy that the county already has in place, and you're dreaming about it tonight, allows you to build back what you had, but it'll be higher because it's incorporating the new regulations. And I think to the extent that we need clarity on that, we can do it, and I think we all agree. But again, I want to emphasize that's different than what's being proposed now in terms of new construction. That has nothing to do with build back.
I do want to add one caveat to this.
Please.
There is a little bit of a hamstring in the administrative interpretation for South Keys. That's where the ambiguity, I think, lies, and we'll take a look at that between now and hopefully our next meeting. First, Commissioner Williams challenge to try to bring some clarity to that.
Anthony, my understanding that you can take a look at this is that under the administrative interpretation, the 35 feet above grade and 42 feet above sea level, which exists on the administrative interpretation, is separate from build back. If you're building back, it's Lee County's build back provisions under the Lee County Land Development Code that applies even under the administrative interpretation. And that's an important act. And it says it right there, it couldn't be any clearer. And that's in, so you know this. It's in section E on page 13. The height standards on South Seas are applicable to all new structures except those being replaced under the existing Lee County build back provisions of the Land Development Code. And so the administrative interpretation does not prevent South Seas and the associations on South Seas from building back what they had. The extent that it's ambiguity, the staff will figure it out in terms of their build back provisions and in the provision that Anthony transmitted.
And the mic. That's simply not true. It's not true. And I gave the examples. It points out to, it specifically references back to section 34-2175. It does. It specifically references that back. And it doesn't allow any allowance for what the flood elevation changes are. And I mean, we've had attorneys look at it. Again, that's what the language says. If there's a different interpretation, then, you know, there's a different interpretation, but the language says that when you pull through it, it references back to that. We go straight through the build back provisions, 13.557. I agree. It doesn't say, hey, at 13.557, go to a different section. It directs you to 34. And the height, the special height district, that's the language in the 13.557. It references that special height district language. And under 34-2175 A2, it says 35 feet over grade, 42 feet over high tide. But I'd love to get the county, if the county can clear it up right now, I'd love to hear it, but that's what the language says, written language.
Okay, and here's the different perspectives. We'll take a look at it and we'll bring back some potential solutions to resolve.
I think we don't think gotcha here. We want to resolve this. And I think everybody agrees the build back provision should allow full build back with the incorporation. What Greg is talking about is there's a provision in the build back provisions of the Lee County Code that creates an emergency review board that allows you to expedite the building back in terms of parking and various other permitting. And when they set out the criteria for what the emergency review board can do, it says you can do all these things on an expedited basis, but you can't ignore restrictions in a particular community. So you can do it quicker, but don't ignore the height restrictions and allow heights greater than you're entitled to in that community. And the provision that Greg is referring to is a provision in the code which was mistakenly not updated by the county when we updated our building heights on Captiva to go 28 feet above base flood elevation. And yes, he's right. It says 35 feet and 42 feet, but everybody, it seems, except maybe South Steve, everybody knows that's just a mistake. It's an error because we didn't update for section 33 when we did 28 feet above base flood elevation. So that should be updated, and it should also include the build back non-conforming provision of our Captiva code. So there's no mistake about it, and Anthony doesn't have to dream about it anymore. The build back provisions will incorporate all building heights necessary to incorporate those regulations.
So I have a point blank question for you. For the ADD, it says 35 feet over grade, 42 feet over high tide. Do you support 35 feet over whatever the design flood elevation is? And why not?
I support for South Seas exactly what everybody else in Captiva has, which is 28 feet above base flood elevation, which is 2 full floors. Or if base flood elevation has to be made higher because of some sort of CCA requirement or 100-year flood requirement, I would support 28 feet above that. And the reason I support that is because the community on Captiva spent more than a year debating this issue, deciding what should be right for Captiva. would protect Captiva, but give people truthful, livable, beautiful forests. And that was the decision that was made by this community, and it applied to everyone. And well, you're wrong about that, and this is what's important to understand. The administrative interpretation, what's being amended in the proposed amendments by the county is a section that says Southeast is governed by the administrative interpretation, which we know, as we all heard it, has the same density as the rest of Captiva, 3 units per acre, or 2 units and any other unit. Okay, and we also know that the building heights on South Seas and the administrative interpretation is more restrictive because it's older than the 28 feet above base flood elevation, right? We know that. But so what the Captiva code says is that the administrative interpretation applies to South Seas. Okay, it applies to South Seas. And South Seas is exempt from the Captiva code. So long as it complies with the administrative interpretation. So long as it complies with the 3 units per acre, and so long as it complies with the 35 and 42 feet. If South Seas chooses to change its administrative interpretation, and no longer comply with that document, it is then governed by the Captiva code. And that would be 28 feet above base flood elevation, and also still 3 units per acre. People have to understand that, for example, South Seas is governed by other parts of the land development code. Our Captiva code on lighting applies to South Seas. Our Captiva code on beach chairs applies to South Seas. The only thing that doesn't apply to South Seas is development rules. And those development rules are specific to the administrative interpretation. And if those development rules are changed, then it reverts back to the Captiva code. And that's what's important. There was no, you're totally separate from Captiva code, South Seas. That's just not true. It's only true if you lived under the administrative interpretation that we've been discussing. And if you look at the administrative interpretation, look at the exact words that it says. Things that aren't specifically included in the administrative interpretation are governed by the remainder of the B County and code. So they're totally integrated. And I hear what you're saying, but if somebody told you that the administrative interpretation completely exempts South Seas from anything in the land development code, in the Captiva code, that's just not how we read it. And I think that's something that the lawyers and something you can work on, Commissioner.
I've had a conversation with Mark Mora, had a conversation with Anthony, and think we can certainly, let's take a look at this, let's do some revisions. Let's see if we can hit that annual meeting, because quite frankly, I think we've identified where there's some misinterpretation. I think there's opportunities for clarity. I think we can certainly come back and have that conversation, because I think it's been fleshed out, and we all agree that we can do a very job on making sure we measure properly, make sure we identify where we're supposed to go with the objective of insurability and resiliency. So I don't think anyone goes away from those principles if we want to achieve those. Let's try to do this. I think, tonight was helpful in regard to having a discussion. This is something we want to do and see if we can address the height issue, and density is not an issue that we're gonna obviously try to have a conversation about tonight. So if we can do that, and he has clarity, Mark says he has clarity, I'd love an opportunity to see some things that obviously occurred and bring back some revisions. So I want to make sure this community achieves what we want to, because the other issue is going to be a much more complicated issue, and density will have constraints on our infrastructure in so many different ways. So again, maybe it's a big issue, maybe it's not, I don't know. But I think there's an understanding here where we all want to have insurability and resiliency. And we want to try to give the best opportunities to make sure we adhere to protection, not only today, but if the FEMA maps change in the next couple of years, which probably have a high probability they will, that we cover that.
I want to, Commissioner, I really want to thank you on behalf of the Captiva community panel for making this happen. I think, but for you, we probably would not have. And I thank the staff for working with the commissioner to make this happen, and hopefully it's productive.
Thank you. I think it's been closing comments, but honestly, I really wanted to have the first meeting stay within the 2 hours. It was really about a discussion with stakeholders, and not that I don't want the public to be engaged. We'll allow, as we get a more refined product, to be engaged. Because right now, as we're having discussions, I think everyone can appreciate the fact that we're trying to have clarity up here. And I know, not that I want to suppress public comment, but have your comments on something that we haven't clarified. Maybe premature. I'm going to ask your indulgences tonight for that adherence. This was advertised as a workshop, and I've adhered to workshops in both ways. In Sanibel, we just public comment, in the county, we don't. So we'll give you an opportunity as we try to refine language, and we have at least an understanding amongst the people here. Because right now, I think everybody wants to achieve resiliency, everybody wants to achieve insurability. And we just need to try to do a better job of seeing if we can codify that.
I'd like to say just real quick, thank you also for making this happen, for getting this out in the open. So important that this happens in a public space. And I think that the discussion that we had tonight was really indicative of why that needs to happen, because there is this ambiguity and there is this ambiguity out there. There is this lack of clarity between some of the stakeholders. And at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want the success of Captiva, we want the success of Southeast, and we want the success of all stakeholders who are out there. And it's all about resiliency. That's why we're here today. That's what it boils down to. That's why we're here, because it started in January with a request to make the LEAD plan and the land development code more resilient and help people build back in a way that can be resilient. And that was a very well-founded request. And I think that it's put us on a path to really improve our regulations that govern how we rebuild after some of these massive storms. But resiliency can mean a lot to things to a lot of different people. And it can mean resilience of buildings, resilience of the community like this, resilience of the environment, resilience of our economy. And these are all considerations that we need to be taking into account when we're considering how to go forward with this. And I think, as we've seen today, when we don't have a clear understanding, when we don't have a path forward to exactly what is going to be coming from the decisions we're making, then that breeds fear. And when we have that, we're not in a position to understand how the decisions we're making today and tomorrow and in these next coming meetings are going to be affecting that resiliency down the line. And as we all come together going forward, I think it's really great that we have now a path forward to see what we can do and what the decisions on the land development code will be doing in the future. But we need to realize that if we don't understand what those are, clear, succinctly, all agreed on what these decisions will be doing, then we have to apply the precautionary principle, and we can't just open up the code or open up the land development plan with the thought that, well, we'll deal with resiliency later, we'll take the guardrails off now, and we'll see what can be done. Because the fact of the matter is, we don't know what these decisions are going to be, and we can't even agree on what is being said in the proposed amendments. So there's no way we can assess how that's going to impact traffic or sewer or water or wildlife or the future of the economy of these islands. So it's really great to see all of us having these discussions and agreeing that what we want is success for everybody in the room and everyone on these islands, success for Lee County, and we want to make it in a way that's sustainable going forward. So this has been a really great thing to be a part of, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to do that tonight.
Any other closing comments? I'm going to thank you all for coming out tonight, and we'll certainly look forward to the revisions and potentially the challenge to see if we can achieve that by the next week. Thank you all.